The warning that fell on deaf ears. The Council of Seven Worlds had gathered in the great crystal chamber of Nexus Prime. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in their floating pods, each species maintaining careful distance from the others. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert thoughts into universal speech. Commander Vex of the Talarian Empire stood at the center podium. His forearms gestured wildly as he spoke, his voice echoing through the chamber, with urgency that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. "You must listen to me," Vex said, his red eyes scanning the assembled crowd. "The humans of Earth are not what they seem. We have studied them for decades. They are dangerous beyond measure." A low rumble of dismissive chatter filled the chamber. The Corvin delegate, Ambassador Thane, raised one of his tentacles. "Commander, surely you exaggerate. Our scouts report that humans are still using primitive chemical rockets. They have barely left their own star system." Vex's mandibles clicked in frustration. "That is exactly what makes them so dangerous. They are warriors by nature. Every aspect of their evolution has been shaped by conflict. They do not surrender. They do not give up. And worst of all, they learn from every defeat." The Zephyrian representative, General Kane, laughed with a sound like wind through metal pipes. "One small planet against the might of 7 galactic empires? Commander Vex, perhaps your recent defeat has clouded your judgment." The chamber erupted in what could generously be called laughter from 7 different species. Vex felt his honor burning, but he pressed on. His own fleet had been the first to encounter human resistance when they attempted to claim a small mining station in the outer rim of human space. 30 of my best warships," Vex continued, his voice growing quieter, forcing the delegates to listen more carefully. 30 ships with crews that had conquered 12 worlds. We approached what appeared to be a simple research station. It had maybe 50 humans aboard. The laughter died down. Even the most dismissive delegates were now paying attention. The station had no weapons that our sensors could detect. No shields, no armor worth mentioning. It should have been a simple capture mission. Vex paused, remembering the horror of that day. Within 6 hours, half my fleet was destroyed. The humans turned their own station into a weapon. They used their life support systems to create explosive devices. They rerouted their reactor to overload and ram our flagship. Ambassador Thane's tentacles writhed with what might have been nervous energy. Surely this was just one incident. Desperate beings often fight harder when cornered. "That is what I thought," Vex replied. "So I studied their history. These humans have been at war with themselves for their entire recorded history. They have turned warfare into an art form. They create weapons from anything. They never stop, adapting, and most terrifying of all, they see death in battle as honor, not defeat." The chamber had grown very quiet. Only the hum of the translation devices could be heard. "I have come here today to warn you all," Vex said, his voice now carrying the weight of prophecy. "Do not underestimate the humans. Do not assume their technology makes them weak. If we continue with our plans to expand into their territory, we will regret it. Mark my words, they will make us regret it." The silence stretched for long moments. Then General Kane spoke again, but this time without laughter. "The Council has already voted. The expansion into human space will proceed as planned. 7 fleets from 7 worlds will move together. Even if your warnings about humans are true, they cannot stand against such force." Vex looked around the chamber one last time. He saw dismissal in some faces, concern in others, but no real understanding in any of them. They had not seen what he had seen. They had not watched humans turn their own deaths into weapons against their enemies. Then, "May the stars have mercy on us all," Vex said quietly, "because the humans certainly will not." As the council session ended, condelegates began filing out to prepare their fleets. None of them noticed the small human observation drone that had been quietly recording everything from its hiding spot in the chamber's upper reaches. The drone powered down its recording systems and began its long journey back to Earth. The message it carried would change everything. Asterisk. The calm before the storm. Admiral Kate Morgan stood in the war room deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. The massive holographic display showed a three-dimensional map of known space, with small red dots marking the positions of 7 alien fleets moving steadily toward Earth. The intelligence from their spy drone had arrived just 3 weeks ago, giving humanity precious little time to prepare. "How long do we have?" asked General Rick Torres, his weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of the tactical display. "Best estimates put them at our outer colonies in 6 months," Morgan replied, her fingers dancing across the control panel to zoom in on the approaching threat. "They're moving in formation, probably planning to hit all our settlements at once." Dr. Elena Vasquez, head of the Defense Research Division, cleared her throat. "The good news is that we've been preparing for this possibility for decades. The bad news is that we expected to face one enemy, not 7. The room fell silent as the weight of their situation settled over them. Earth's military had grown strong over the past century, but they had always assumed any alien contact would be gradual, diplomatic. Nobody had planned for a coordinated invasion by 7 galactic empires. "What assets do we have?" Torres asked. Morgan pulled up another display. "The home fleet has 200 ships, ranging from destroyers to R3 dreadnoughts. The Colonial Defense Force has another 150 scattered across 12 systems, plus whatever the civilian mining operations can contribute." "Against how many enemy ships?" "Intelligence suggests each fleet has between 300 and 500 vessels. So we're looking at somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 enemy ships." The math was sobering. Even with humanity's reputation for punching above their weight, 10-to-1 odds seemed impossible. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward. "Which is why we're not going to fight them the way they expect." She activated her own presentation, showing technical diagrams that made several of the military officers lean forward with interest. "For the past 50 years, we've been developing what we call asymmetric warfare protocols," she explained. "We always knew that any alien civilization capable of reaching us would likely have superior numbers and technology. So we focused on making every human life, every human ship, every human settlement count for as much as possible." The first diagram showed a cross-section of what looked like an ordinary cargo ship. This is a converted freighter. On the surface, it appears to be carrying grain and manufactured goods. In reality, it's a mobile weapons platform with enough firepower to cripple a battleship. General Torres whistled low. "How many of these do we have?" "Every civilian ship in our fleet has been modified," Vasquez replied. "Mining vessels, cargo haulers, passenger liners, research ships. They all look harmless, but they're all ready for war." Admiral Morgan pulled up tactical simulations. "The plan is simple in concept, complex in execution. We let them come to U.S. We make them think they're winning. And then we show them what humans do when we're cornered." The holographic display shifted to show Earth's outer colonies. Small settlements on mining worlds, research stations, and agricultural planets dotted the region of space the aliens would have to pass through. "Each colony has been prepared," Morgan continued. "The civilians have been evacuated to harden shelters or evacuated entirely. What remains are volunteer defenders and a lot of very nasty surprises." "What kind of surprises?" asked Colonel James Park, the youngest officer in the room. Dr. Vasquez smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "The kind that turn space stations into bombs. The kind that make asteroid mining equipment into rail guns. The kind that use terraforming equipment to create weapons that don't exist in any military manual." We've studied every piece of intelligence we have on these 7 species, Admiral Morgan added. Their tactics, their technology, their psychology. They're used to warfare between civilizations with similar capabilities. They expect fleets to meet in open space, shields against shields, weapons against weapons. They're not prepared for what we're going to do to them, General Torres said, understanding dawning in his voice. Exactly. They think they know what humans are capable of because they've seen our technology. But they haven't seen our imagination. They haven't seen what we do when survival is on the line. Colonel Park studied the tactical displays with growing amazement. This is insane. We're essentially turning our entire civilization into a weapon. Not our entire civilization, Admiral Morgan corrected. Just the parts they're going to see. The real question is whether we can make them pay such a high price for their invasion that they'll think twice about continuing. Dr. Vasquez brought up the final slide in her presentation. It showed estimated casualty figures and resource expenditure projections. The numbers were staggering. Even if this works perfectly, we're going to lose a lot of people, she said quietly. A lot of ships, a lot of colonies, a lot of everything we've built out here. But if we can make them hurt badly enough, maybe we can save Earth itself. And if we can't? Asked Torres, asterisk. First Blood, the mining colony of New Haven, looked peaceful from space. 3 small orbital platforms surrounded a rocky planet where 10,000 humans had once extracted rare metals from the asteroid belt. Now, as the Corvin advance fleet approached, only a few hundred souls remained on the surface. Fleet Commander Drack studied the tactical display from his flagship. His sensors showed exactly what he expected, a lightly defended mining operation with minimal military presence. 3 small patrol ships orbited the planet, and the mining platforms appeared to be operating normally. No challenge on approach, reported his communications officer. They seem to be ignoring us completely. Drack's tentacles curled with satisfaction. This would be easier than expected. The humans were either too primitive to detect his fleet or too cowardly to respond. Either way, New Haven would fall within hours, giving his forces their first foothold in human space. Signal the fleet, Drack ordered. Standard occupation formation. We'll take the orbital platforms first, then secure the surface installations. What Drack couldn't see was Captain Lisa Chun, hidden in the asteroid field with her converted cargo vessel Defiance. The ship looked like any other freight hauler, complete with cargo pods and civilian markings. But beneath its harmless exterior lay enough firepower to level a city. Chun watched through her passive sensors as the alien fleet moved into position. 200 ships in perfect formation, their commanders confident in their overwhelming superiority. They had no idea they were flying into humanity's first trap. On the surface of New Haven, Mine Supervisor Tom Brady finished the final preparations. The colony's fusion reactors had been rigged to overload on command. The mining equipment had been converted into massive rail guns. Every tunnel, every building, every piece of infrastructure had been turned into a weapon or a trap. All civilians evacuated to Bunker 7, reported his second-in-command, Maria Santos. Volunteers are in position. We're ready for them. Brady nodded grimly. 43 people had volunteered to stay behind and operate the defenses. They all knew the odds of survival were basically 0. But they also knew that every alien ship they destroyed here would be one less ship threatening Earth. Commander Drack's fleet moved closer to the orbital platforms. His sensors detected normal mining operations. Cargo ships moving between the Usse, platforms and the surface, automated equipment processing ore, routine civilian traffic. Everything appeared exactly as it should. Begin docking procedures with Platform Alpha, Drack ordered. Boarding parties prepare for immediate occupation. The first Corvin transport ship approached the mining platform. Its pilot was relaxed, expecting no resistance from the obviously civilian structure. The docking clamps engaged with a soft thud that transmitted through both hulls. That was when Tom Brady triggered the first surprise that the mining platform wasn't mining anything anymore. It was a massive bomb, packed with enough explosive material to vaporize anything within 50 kilometers. The detonation lit up space like a new star, taking out the Corvin transport and 3 nearby escort ships in an instant. What in the void was that? Drax shouted as his ship rocked from the shockwave. Before anyone could answer, the second platform exploded, then the third. Each detonation sent debris and radiation cascading through the Corvin formation, damaging shields and blinding sensors. But the real surprise came from the asteroid field. Captain Sean activated her ship's concealed weapons and opened fire. Her converted cargo hauler revealed missile pods that had been disguised as shipping containers, railguns that had been hidden behind false hull plating, energy weapons that emerged from what had appeared to be docking bays. The Defiance wasn't alone. Across the asteroid field, dozens of civilian ships suddenly became military vessels. Mining barges revealed themselves as gun platforms. Transport ships deployed hidden weapons. Research vessels became missile boats. Commander Drac watched in horror as his perfectly organized fleet fell into chaos. His sensors couldn't distinguish between real threats and harmless debris. His communications were jammed by signals that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Return fire," he ordered. "All ships return fire." But the human ships weren't fighting like a traditional fleet. They didn't form battle lines or engage in honorable combat. Instead, they struck from concealment, fired everything they had, and vanished back into the asteroid field before the Corvin ships could respond. On the surface of New Haven, the real battle was just beginning. The first wave of Corvin landing craft approached the colony, expecting light resistance from mining equipment and civilian defenders. Instead, they found that every piece of mining gear had been turned into a weapon of war. Massive ore extractors became particle beam cannons. Rock crushers became missile launchers. The very tunnels of the mine became kill zones filled with explosives and automated defenses. Tom Brady coordinated the defense from the colony's control center, watching as alien landing craft were destroyed by equipment that had been designed to crack asteroids. The Corvins had superior technology, but they had never fought an enemy that could turn industrial equipment into military hardware. "Mining Laser 7 is overheating," reported Maria Santos. "We've got maybe 10 more shots before it burns out." "Make them count," Brady replied, redirecting the massive mining laser toward a cluster of incoming transports. The beam that had once carved through solid rock now sliced through alien armor like it was papered out in space. Captain Chun was having the time of her life. Her cargo ship had taken heavy damage, but she had already destroyed 6 enemy vessels and damaged a dozen more. The Corvins were still trying to figure out which ships were threats and which were harmless debris. "This is defiance to all human vessels," she broadcast on the tactical frequency. "Execute withdrawal pattern 7. Make them chase us into the deep field." The human ships began falling back, drawing the confused and angry Corvin fleet deeper into the asteroid belt. Every rock could hide a weapon. Every piece of debris could be a bomb. Every shadow could conceal an enemy. Commander Drac realized too late that he had fallen into a carefully planned trap. His fleet was scattered, his formations broken, his officers reporting casualties and damage from all directions. What should have been a simple occupation had become a nightmare of asymmetric warfare. "Sir," his tactical officer reported with obvious fear in his voice, "we've lost 37 ships. The humans are using tactics we've never encountered. They're turning everything into weapons." Drax stared at the tactical display, watching as more of his ships disappeared from the screen. The humans weren't just fighting them. They were teaching them that there was no such thing as a non-combatant in human space. On the surface of New Haven, Tom Brady prepared to trigger the final surprise. The colony's main fusion reactor had been rigged to overload in a very specific way. When it went critical, it would create an explosion visible from 3 star systems away. All remaining personnel to the bunkers, he ordered. 30 seconds to final detonation. The explosion that followed turned New Haven into a brief second sun. The blast wave destroyed everything in orbit, including most of the remaining Corvan fleet. Only a handful of ships at the edge of the system survived to carry word of the disaster back to their commanders. Captain Shun, her ship crippled, but still functional, watched the fireball expand from her position in the outer asteroid belt. 43 volunteers had just sacrificed themselves to destroy 200 enemy ships. The math was brutal, but it was the kind of math that won wars. Commander Drac, bleeding from multiple wounds as his damaged flagship limped away from the New Haven system, finally understood what Commander Vex had tried to warn them about. The humans didn't just fight. They turned their entire civilization into a weapon and wielded it without hesitation. As reports of the disaster reached the other alien fleets, the commanders began to realize that their invasion of human space was not going to be the easy conquest they had expected. The humans had just taught them their first lesson in asymmetric warfare. It would not be their last. Asterisk. The lesson spreads the emergency session of the 7 Fleets Command Council convened in the cold void between star systems. 7 massive command. Ships hung in space, their hulls scarred from recent battles that none of their crews wanted to discuss. General Kane of the Zephyrian Empire spoke first, his metallic voice carrying across the quantum communication link. The Corvan Advance Fleet has been destroyed. 200 ships reduced to scrap metal by a mining colony that barely registered on our threat assessments. Fleet Admiral Knox of the Hegemony shifted uneasily in her command pod. Commander Drac's report makes little sense. He claims the humans turned mining equipment into weapons of war. Surely he exaggerates to cover his failure. I wish that were true, replied War Master Byte of the Silicon Collective. His digital consciousness flickered with what might have been concern. My probes have confirmed the debris field at New Haven. The energy signatures suggest the humans detonated their own fusion reactors as weapons. The communication channel fell silent as the implications sank in. Civilized species didn't turn their own infrastructure into bombs. They surrendered when faced with overwhelming force. They negotiated. They didn't sacrifice entire colonies just to inflict casualties on their enemies. Admiral Core of the Void Hunters spoke next, his voice a harsh rasp. My scouts report similar incidents across 3 other systems. The humans are evacuating their outer colonies and rigging everything they leave behind to explode. They're turning their own territory into a minefield. This is not warfare, protested General Yix of the Star Empire. This is madness. They're destroying decades of their own development just to slow us down. And it's working, Admiral Knox admitted reluctantly. We've lost nearly 400 ships across all fronts, and we haven't even reached their core systems yet. At this rate, we'll have taken 50% casualties before we see Earth. War Master Byte processed the tactical data streaming in from across human space. His digital mind could analyze millions of variables simultaneously, but the patterns he was seeing made no logical sense. I have identified the core problem, he announced. We are fighting an enemy that does not behave according to standard military doctrine. They do not seek to preserve their own forces. They do not attempt to hold strategic positions. Their only goal appears to be inflicting maximum damage on our fleets, regardless of the cost to themselves. General Kane's communication pod flickered with agitation. Then we adjust our tactics. We bypass their trapped colonies and strike directly at their core worlds. Impossible, replied Admiral Core. They've positioned their traps along every viable approach route. We would have to take massive detours that would cost us months of travel time. Our supply lines would be stretched beyond breaking, and we punch through, suggested General Yix. Overwhelming force at a single point. Accept the losses and push through to Earth itself. War Master Byte ran the calculations in microseconds. Probability of success, 12%. Estimated fleet losses, 68%. Even if successful, remaining forces would be insufficient to occupy and hold human territory. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of military commanders realizing their perfect plan was falling apart. Meanwhile, in the hidden bunkers beneath Earth's surface, Admiral Morgan reviewed the battle reports with grim satisfaction. The strategy was working better than she had dared hope, but the cost was becoming apparent. 17 colonies destroyed, reported General Torres, reading from his tablet. 37,000 military personnel killed in action. Unknown civilian casualties from the colonies that chose to fight rather than evacuate. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her technical displays. The good news is that our casualty estimates were overly pessimistic. We're inflicting approximately 8-1 losses on the enemy. The bad news is that we're running out of colonies to sacrifice. Admiral Morgan studied the strategic map. Red zones marked the areas where human colonies had been destroyed, either by human defenders or alien bombardment. Yellow zones showed colonies still being evacuated. Green zones were the core systems that had to be held at all costs. Phase 2 is working, she said finally. The question is whether we can transition to Phase 3 before they adapt to our tactics. Colonel Park, now bearing the scars of the Battle of Titan Station, spoke up from his position at the tactical console. Intelligence suggests they're having command disputes. 3 of their fleets have gone completely silent. Either they're maintaining communication blackout, or they're retreating, General Torres finished. Maybe we've hurt them badly enough to make them reconsider. Admiral Morgan shook her head. Don't count on it. They've committed too much to this invasion to back down now. But they are learning. The reports from the Outer Rim show they're starting to use long-range bombardment instead of landing parties. They're treating every human installation as a potential bomb. Which means Phase 3 becomes even more important, Dr. Vasquez added. We need to draw them into the core systems where our real defenses are waiting. Back in space, the 7 fleets were indeed adapting. Admiral Knox had taken command of the combined forces after the other commanders proved unable to agree on tactics. New doctrine, she announced to her fleet commanders. We treat everything in human space as hostile. No boarding actions. No attempts at occupation. We destroy everything from long range and move on. The strategy was brutal but effective. Human colonies died under orbital bombardment rather than exploding in the faces of landing parties. The casualty ratio began to shift back toward something resembling normal warfare, but the humans had prepared for this adaptation too. Captain. Mike Stone watched from his concealed position in the outer system as the Zephyrian Third Fleet approached the agricultural world of Haven's Rest. The aliens had learned not to get close to human installations, so they were preparing to bombard the planet from extreme range. What they didn't know was that Haven's Rest had been evacuated months ago. What looked like a thriving agricultural world was actually the largest trap humanity had ever constructed. The entire planet had been turned into a weapon. All teams report ready, Stone whispered into his communicator. Orbital mirrors in position. Reactor network primed. Tectonic charges armed. He waited until the alien fleet was in perfect position. Their ships arranged in bombardment formation with their shields, focused forward to protect against any desperate counterattack from the planet below. Then he triggered humanity's masterpiece, the orbital mirrors, disguised as agricultural satellites, suddenly focused the system's sunlight into coherent beams that struck the planet's surface with the power of stellar flares. But instead of destroying the surface, the beams activated a network of fusion reactors that had been buried across the entire planet. Haven's Rest didn't explode. It became a weapon that fired itself at the enemy fleet. The coordinated detonation of 200 fusion reactors created a directed energy pulse that reached out across space like the fist of an angry god. The alien ships, caught completely off guard with their shields facing the wrong direction, died by the dozens. But that was just the opening act. As the alien fleet reeled from the energy pulse, hidden human ships emerged from every piece of debris in the system. Not converted civilian vessels this time, but purpose-built warships that had been lying in wait for months. Admiral Knox watched in horror as her third fleet was torn apart by an enemy that had turned an entire star system into an ambush. The planet below was gone, consumed by its own weapon discharge, but it had taken most of her ships with it. All units, emergency withdrawal, she ordered, but it was too late. The human ships had appeared behind her fleet, cutting off the retreat routes. Captain Stone smiled grimly as his task force closed the trap. They had sacrificed an entire world, but they were about to destroy 300 enemy ships. The math was getting better. As the Battle of Haven's Rest raged on, word began to reach the other alien fleets. The humans weren't just turning their colonies into weapons anymore. They were turning entire star systems into kill zones. For the first time since the invasion began, some of the alien commanders began to wonder if Commander Vex had been right. Maybe the humans were too dangerous to fight, but by then, it was far too late to stop the war they had started. The gates of hell. The Sol system had never looked more beautiful or more deadly. Admiral Morgan stood on the observation deck of the orbital fortress Cerberus, watching as the last of humanity's defenses fell into place around their home star. 3 years of constant warfare had reduced the 7 fleets from over 2,000 ships to barely 800. But those 800 were now approaching the heart of human space, and they were no longer making the mistakes that had cost them so dearly in the outer systems. Final defensive positions confirmed, reported General Torres from the Tactical Center. All civilian populations have been evacuated to the deep bunkers. Military personnel are at battle stations across the system. Admiral Morgan nodded, but her attention was focused on the massive alien fleet that had just entered the outer edge of the Sol system. These weren't the overconfident commanders who had started this war. These were hardened veterans who had learned to fear every piece of human technology. "They're not advancing," observed Colonel Park. "They're holding position at the edge of the system and scanning everything." "Smart," Morgan admitted. "They know we've had 3 years to prepare. They're not going to rush into another trap." But humanity had indeed prepared. The Sol system was no longer recognizable as the peaceful star system that had given birth to human civilization. Every planet had been fortified. Every asteroid had been weaponized. Every piece of space debris had been turned into a potential bomb. Admiral Knox commanded the combined alien fleet from her flagship Domination. She had survived the disasters of the outer systems by being more cautious than her peers, and she had no intention of repeating their mistakes. "Full spectrum analysis of the entire system," she ordered. "I want to know about every ship, every station, every piece of floating debris. If it's bigger than a pebble, I want it cataloged and analyzed." Her chief science officer, a multi-tentacled being named Researcher Glom, worked frantically at his console. "Admiral, the energy readings are unprecedented. The humans appear to have militarized their entire star system. I'm detecting weapon signatures from objects that should be civilian installations." "Confirmed," added her tactical officer. "The asteroid belt shows signs of massive industrial modification. Many of the asteroids are broadcasting power signatures consistent with ship-class weapons." Knox studied the tactical display with growing unease. The humans had turned their entire home system into a fortress. But more than that, they had turned it into a weapon pointed directly at anyone foolish enough to approach. "How many ships do they have in system?" she asked. "Difficult to determine," Glom replied. "I'm reading approximately 500 confirmed military vessels, but the sensor readings suggest that many civilian ships have been modified with military-grade equipment. The actual number of combat-capable vessels could be significantly higher. And their ground installations? Every planet shows signs of extensive fortification. The gas giant moons appear to have been converted into weapons platforms. Even their sun shows artificial modifications." Knox felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold of space. "What kind of modifications?" "Unknown, Admiral. But the energy patterns suggest they've placed artificial structures in close solar orbit. The power output is ... concerning." On Cerberus, Admiral Morgan was watching the alien fleet with the patience of a predator. She had spent 3 years planning for this moment, and she was ready to show the aliens what humanity could accomplish when they had time to prepare properly. "Phase 1 is complete," Dr. Vasquez reported from her engineering station. "All solar collectors are online and feeding power to the main weapon grid. We have enough energy to power a small star. Phase 2? The asteroid belt modifications are ready. Each rock is essentially a guided missile with the destructive power of a battleship. We have over 10,000 of them aimed at the enemy fleet. Phase 3? The planetary defense networks are operational. Every world in the system can defend itself, and every world has been rigged to take as many enemies with it as possible if it falls." Admiral Morgan allowed herself a tight smile. "And Phase 4? Dr. Vasquez hesitated. "The solar weapon is ready, but Admiral, if we use it, there's no going back. The environmental damage to the system will be severe. Earth itself might not survive the aftermath." "Better to rule over ashes than to serve in chains," Morgan replied quietly. "If we're going to die, we're going to take every last one of them with us." The standoff continued for 6 hours. The alien fleet remained at the edge of the system, analyzing every possible threat. The human fleet held position near Earth, waiting for the aliens to make their move. Finally, Admiral Knox made her decision. "We'll advance in phases," she announced to her fleet commanders. "Outer perimeter first. Destroy anything that looks like a threat. Then we'll work our way in system by system until we reach Earth itself." The alien fleet began to move, spreading out into a formation designed to minimize casualties from the kind of massive traps the humans had been using. They advanced slowly, carefully, destroying every asteroid and piece of debris that showed signs of modification. It was exactly what Admiral Morgan had hoped they would do. "They're committing to a systematic advance," she reported to Earth Command. "Estimated time to reach Earth orbit, 18 hours. Initiate Scorched Earth Protocol." Across the Sol system, human installations began to activate. But instead of the desperate traps and converted civilian equipment that had characterized the outer system battles, these were purpose-built weapons of war designed by a species that had been perfecting the art of killing for thousands of years. The first wave of alien ships entered the asteroid belt and found themselves facing the most concentrated firepower in human history. Every asteroid that they had marked as modified was indeed a weapon, but not the kind they expected. Instead of bombs or hidden missile platforms, the asteroids were massive railguns powered by fusion reactors and aimed with computer precision. When they fired, they didn't launch missiles or energy beams. They launched other asteroids. Captain Alex Reed commanded the asteroid Fortress Hammer, a former mining station that had been converted into a weapon capable of hurling building-sized rocks at near light speed. His crew of 200 worked with mechanical precision, loading and firing their impossible weapon as fast as the laws of physics would allow. "Target acquired," announced his weapons officer. "Alien cruiser at range 400,000 kilometers. Fire." Reed ordered. The asteroid they launched wasn't just a rock. It was a carefully shaped projectile with its own guidance system and enough kinetic energy to punch through any known shield technology. When it struck the alien cruiser, the ship simply ceased to exist. Across the asteroid belt, hundreds of Vaj. Similar weapons opened fire. The alien fleet found itself under bombardment from projectiles that no point defense system could stop and no armor could withstand. But the asteroids were just the opening act as the alien fleet tried to respond. To the kinetic bombardment, the gas giant moons revealed their true nature. What had appeared to be natural satellites were actually artificial constructs, each one a weapons platform the size of a small planet. The Battle of Sol had begun, and for the first time in the war, humanity was fighting with weapons designed from the ground up to destroy alien fleets. Admiral Knox watched her carefully planned advance turn into chaos as her ships were picked off by weapons she had never imagined. The humans weren't just fighting desperately anymore. They were fighting with the full industrial capacity of their home system behind them. "All ships, emergency acceleration," she ordered. "We push through to Earth before they can bring more weapons online." It was the worst possible decision she could have made, as the alien fleet bunched together for their desperate charge toward Earth. Admiral Morgan smiled and gave the order that would end the war one way or another. "Activate the solar weapon." In the heart of the Sol system, humanity's greatest and most terrible creation came online. They had built a ring of collectors around their own sun, turning their star into a weapon that could sterilize entire fleets. The light of Sol itself reached out toward the alien ships, and Admiral Knox finally understood what Commander Vex had tried to warn them about years ago. Humans didn't just fight wars. They turned the very forces of nature into weapons of destruction. And now it was far too late to beg for mercy. The sun's wrath, the solar weapon fired. For a brief moment, the Sol system contained 2 stars. The ring of collectors that humanity had spent 3 years building around their sun focused the power of stellar fusion into a coherent beam of destruction that reached across space like the finger of an angry god. Admiral Knox had perhaps 2 seconds to understand what was happening before the focused sunlight struck her fleet. Ships that had survived 3 years of desperate warfare simply evaporated. Others, caught at the edge of the beam, melted like ice in a furnace. The Domination was one of the lucky ones. Knox's flagship was far enough from the main beam to survive, but the electromagnetic pulse that followed knocked out half her systems and left her ship tumbling through space. "Damage report," she screamed as her bridge crew struggled to restore basic functions. "Engines offline," reported her chief engineer. "Weapon systems down. Life support at minimal levels. We've lost contact with 70% of the fleet." Knox forced herself to look at the tactical display. Where 800 ships had been advancing toward Earth just moments before, only scattered debris and perhaps 50 crippled vessels remained. On Cerberus, Admiral Morgan watched the aftermath of humanity's ultimate weapon with mixed feelings. The solar beam had worked exactly as designed, destroying most of the alien fleet in a single devastating strike. But the weapon had also damaged several human installations and would continue to affect the system's environment for decades too. "Come, solar weapon offline," reported Dr. Vasquez. "The collectors are overheating and need time to cool down. We won't be able to fire again for at least 6 hours." "Will we need to?" asked General Torres, staring at the tactical display showing the scattered remains of the alien fleet. "Maybe not," Morgan replied, "but we finish this properly. No survivors to carry word back to their home worlds." No witnesses to report our capabilities. Across the Sol system, human forces began the methodical destruction of the surviving alien ships. The asteroid railguns continued their bombardment. The gas giant weapons platforms fired their planet-killing missiles. Human warships moved in. For close quarters combat with aliens too damaged to fight back effectively. Captain Reed's Fortress Hammer had survived the solar weapons activation and was now hunting down crippled alien vessels. His crew worked with grim efficiency, loading and firing their massive railgun at targets that could barely maneuver. Another cruiser at bearing 270, reported his weapons officer. She's venting atmosphere and appears to be adrift. No. Mercy, Reed replied. Fire. The asteroid projectile crossed the void in seconds, turning the alien cruiser into an expanding cloud of debris. It was the 43rd ship Hammer had destroyed since the battle began. But not all the alien ships were helpless. Admiral Knox had managed to restore basic functions to her flagship and was attempting to rally the survivors for one final desperate assault on Earth itself. All remaining ships, she broadcast on the emergency frequency, form up on my position. We make for Earth. Even if we die, we'll take their homeworld with us.